This is lecture number DR025US19. This is the 25th of the Mega Genius lectures and the 19th lecture of the Uncommon Sense series. It was recorded on November 17th, 2000. The title of this lecture is Houdini's Gift to You. It is 30 minutes long. Copyright 2000 by Mega Genius. All rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not, in whole or in part, be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
Houdini. Just the word conjures a fascinating, an intriguing, and a promising concept of a man totally free, eloquently expressed many years ago by someone who wrote in part, "From every contrivance of bondage and pain he escapes without effort, and smiles in disdain." About the time of Eusapia Palladino's fall from grace, things really began heating up in the realm of psychic research. Houdini burst upon the world stage. This internationally acclaimed escapologist and magician, who convinced the world he could escape from anything, had spent some 30 years investigating the psychic field and related areas. So pervasive was his determination to fully understand the domain that he even found it necessary to hire a full-time librarian to care for his reference materials, which included the largest collection of books on trickery, occultism, mysticism, psychic phenomena, and kindred subjects in the world. After his mother's death in 1913, Houdini spent the majority of his time in earnest pursuit of any psychic who could establish contact with her or any of some 24 departed friends and relay any meaningful message from beyond the grave. What he found, instead, was a cat's breakfast of nonsensical dribble, totally erroneous information, and a spirit message from his son. He never had one. In 1919, shortly after the end of World War I, Houdini declared his own war on the fraudulence of psychics and devoted much of the rest of his life to exposing such dishonesty around the world. And no one could ferret it out like Houdini. The problem, as he saw it, was simple. Doctors, physicists, psychologists, and all other investigators who were not thoroughly educated in the subject of trickery could readily be fooled by magicians, and just as easily by unethical magicians posing as psychics. The solution was to determine whether a psychic was merely a magician, something a magician extraordinaire could best determine. Despite what Houdini called the reek of fraud that clouded every psychic demonstration he had ever seen, he continued his investigation of psychic phenomena with an open mind. He explained, quote, "Understand me, I do not say that the dead cannot talk with the living. What I do say is that such conversation has never taken place in my presence." Unquote. There were many who believed that Houdini, who had spent a lifetime challenging the world to devise some method of confining him, was, in fact, himself a psychic. Effortlessly he escaped from regulation straitjackets, not the phony, gaffed variety used by imitators today, from wet sheet packs, institutional crazy cribs, airtight coffins, tarred ropes, submerged packing crates, riveted and padlocked iron boilers, safes, hundreds of pounds of tire chains, a reinforced high-pressure diving suit, an oil and tar-treated sea bag, a zinc-lined piano case, a plate glass box, a roll-top desk, an iron hamper, a witch cage, a regulation United States Postal Service mailbag, a gigantic football, the stomach of a huge unidentifiable sea monster, to name only a few, and untold prisons throughout the world. When shackled by none less than the superintendent of Scotland Yard, he escaped in 1 second flat. In Moscow, Russia, to the chagrin of the secret police, he freed himself in the nude from the dreaded Siberian transport cell used to locate their most dangerous criminals, even though the only key that could unlock it was thousands of miles away in Siberia. In Washington, D.C., he was ushered by the superintendent of the United States Jail to the condemned murderers' row in the maximum security facilities, where he was stripped, searched by a physician, and imprisoned in the cell that had held United States President James A. Garfield's assassin until his execution. Houdini not only escaped with nonchalance, but jokingly relocated 8 condemned inmates, switching them within their locked cells, all within a few moments. In Boston, at the Tombs, he was stripped and searched, manacled hand and foot, and locked in the prison's most escape-proof cell by the superintendent of police, who then locked Houdini's clothes in another cell in a separate part of the facility. Houdini released himself from his cell, located and entered the cell that held his clothes, dressed, escaped through a heavy security door, skipped unseen across the prison yard, scaled a security wall and an iron fence, and just 15 minutes after he had initially been confined, personally broke the news of his escape to the startled superintendent by telephone. On another occasion, near Los Angeles, California, he was buried within the earth like a corpse at the legal depth of 6 feet. Still in utter defiance of death, Houdini unassistedly arose from the grave. In Germany, an official of the Imperial Police of Cologne declared publicly in writing that Houdini was guilty of fraud for proclaiming that he could escape from anything. Houdini requested an apology, but was ignored. The formidable German police were merely amused. Houdini was not. Unbelievably, he sued for libel. When the case came to court, the judge permitted an expert for the police to confine Houdini with their most effective official restraint. To prove his point, the escapologist would have to extricate himself in full view of the court. Seconds after the device had been applied, Houdini stepped free. The police were stunned. The judge was impressed. Houdini won his case, but the police appealed the decision. When the case was retried before Cologne's Court of Appeals, the police submitted more than 24 affidavits guaranteeing that Houdini could be held fast by their official restraints. Houdini laughed, contending that their stack of claims was ridiculous, as they'd already tried and failed. Well, apparently the police had substantial doubts of their own, for this time they proposed an entirely different approach. They had commissioned an expert locksmith to manufacture the mother of all handcuffs. After several months of tedious creativity, a master locksmith had devised a pair that, once locked, would never open again. Ever. In fact, he had made a key to fit the cuffs, and even it would not open them. Once they were locked forever. If Houdini could not release them, his only consolation would be in knowing that no one else could either. Snap, snap. The deed was done. The police double-checked to ensure that the device had been applied properly, and, in this case, tightly. Houdini was then escorted to a private chamber, and the Court of Appeals settled in for the long haul. Moments later, the chamber door opened, Houdini emerged, strode to the center of the courtroom, and dropped the unlocked cuffs to the floor with a resounding clatter. The police were stunned. The judge was impressed. Houdini had won again, but the police appealed the decision to the Oberlandesgericht, the highest court in the land. When that court's final decision was handed down, there was no recourse from the verdict. Due to a complete absence of evidence to the contrary, the judges ruled that Houdini had been libeled. He even received a public apology by command of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Emperor of Germany. One of Houdini's most popular escapes was from the Chinese water torture cell, which he copyrighted as a play, a classic unification of mystery and suspense. It was, in essence, a vertical tomb of plate glass, mahogany, and steel, which he invited spectators to freely inspect at each performance. After it was filled to the brim with water, Houdini was submerged in an inverted position, with his ankles locked in 350-pound stocks and held fast by padlocks furnished by the audience. Many theorized that Houdini possessed some truly supernatural ability that enabled him to release himself from this and countless other restraints. Some said he dematerialized, a belief confirmed by J. Hewitt Mackenzie, president of the British College of Psychic Science. He asserted that he had seized an opportunity to stand beside the escape artist on the stage of the Grand Theatre, Islington, London, and had actually seen Houdini's body dematerialize within the Chinese water torture cell, and almost instantly materialize some distance behind it. Dozens of students of escapology have met their deaths attempting to imitate Houdini's underwater and buried alive escapes. Hundreds more have sought to garner publicity by merely pretending to duplicate his feats. For example, the mystery of the Chinese water torture cell, which Houdini presented on both sides of the Atlantic some 5,000 times during a 13-year period, has been absurdly imitated in recent years, but never honestly and successfully duplicated. A 1953 motion picture, Houdini, starring Tony Curtis, failed to present the most dramatic escapes of the magician's career and inaccurately portrayed his final attempt to escape from the Chinese water torture cell as unsuccessful. Apparently, even Hollywood thought the truth was too incredible for the public to believe. In fact, as with all the challenges throughout his life, Houdini always escaped. I am invariably amused by magicians who continually try to capitalize on Houdini's immortal fame by falsely alleging that they are performing some great feat identical to one executed by Houdini, or that they are performing escapes that Houdini could not have performed. They did not know Houdini. The great Houdini used a multitude of tricks of the trade to effect many of his releases, but also stated that he had a single, ultimate secret that enabled him to escape from anything, a secret he intended to take to the grave, and did. Now, most magicians think his statement was merely an attempt to misdirect their thinking, which is what the genius formula reveals is exactly what Houdini wanted them to think. In fact, in 1976, during my own professional career, when I performed the world's first and only publicly witnessed and scientifically documented transcontinental teleportation that I discussed in the second lecture of the Genius Formula series, actually it might more accurately be described as an escape from time, it was based entirely on Houdini's ultimate secret. Houdini, the luminary of mystery and death, died on Halloween. His death, at the age of 52, resulted from an offstage mishap, an accidental blow to the left side of his abdomen that resulted in a ruptured appendix. Now, it may seem ironic that this daredevil, who risked his life daily for decades, passed so undramatically. However, he continued to fool all those about him, even unto his death. His physicians were confounded in their attempts to fathom his injury. The possibility of a ruptured appendix was not supported by his symptoms. All physicians knew that the appendix is on a human being's right side. Too late, they discovered that Houdini's appendix was materialized on his left. Before his passing on October 31, 1926, Houdini repeatedly promised to escape from death. He also made a secret pact with his wife that, if possible, he would communicate a previously agreed-upon message from the other side. Every Halloween for the next 10 years, Mrs. Houdini participated in a seance in hopes of hearing the words that she longed for from her husband, but they never came. For 16 years after his death, she implored all psychics around the world to do their best to establish contact and receive international fame. Many tried, but none succeeded. One medium's message began, "Dear Agnes," she recalled, adding, quote, "If my husband didn't know my name was Beatrice after 49 years of marriage, then I had better send him a message," unquote. In February of 1943, Mrs. Houdini announced that she still hoped to meet her husband on the other side, but was giving up the experiment. She declared, quote, I gave the spirits their chance to make their move. Now I'll make mine." Unquote. Exactly what she meant is open to conjecture, but only a few hours later, Mrs. Houdini unexpectedly died of heart failure. Did Houdini keep his promise to escape from death, and is such an escape possible? Certainly, if anyone could effect such an extrication, we might expect it to be the man of mystery who transgressed so many other limits, boundaries, and barriers with invariable success. Although Mrs. Houdini and the world waited for 16 years for the metaphysical community to establish verifiable contact with her husband, it is entirely predictable that Houdini would not communicate through a psychic. In spite of Mrs. Houdini's hopes that he would, which is quite understandable, it was never his objective. The secret pact was only an attempt to garner further evidence to establish whether communication through a psychic was possible, and to put psychics the world over to a simple and easily verifiable test. That all the psychics failed is entirely irrelevant to Houdini's promise and ability to return from the dead. Any question about Houdini's intention is easily clarified by a review of his own words. When asked if he would return from the dead, he promised, quote, "I will, but not to ring bells," unquote, meaning to cause such alleged psychic effects in a seance. How then? He stated, quote, "I firmly believe, and this belief is based on investigation, observation, and, in a measure, personal experience, that somehow, somewhere, sometime, we return in another human form," unquote. And that was precisely what he vowed to do. One of Houdini's best-kept secrets was that he frequently escaped from the many contrivances of pain and bondage sooner than people realized. Often, when he knew that the spectator's view of an escape was diverted by a small curtain or portable screen, he would hide a book, magazine, or newspaper in the immediate vicinity to occupy himself until the moment was right to reveal that he had escaped. It was common for his assistants to whisper to him from the stage wings to turn the pages more quietly. Only when the last members of his audience began to suspect that he had finally failed would this highest-paid entertainer of his era muss his hair, dishevel his clothing, toss a glass of water on his face, and emerge, to the absolute delight of an astonished crowd, into thunderous applause. Is there any possibility that he may have escaped from the confines of death, only to be biding his time until the moment is right? Only Houdini could say, but it would be precisely in character. We have only reviewed a few of the hundreds of famous psychics of the 19th and 20th centuries, but each was selected for a reason. As innocent children, the Fox sisters intended only to mischievously cause unidentifiable noises that bumped in the night, but were soon heard around the world. They unintentionally originated the psychic movement of the modern era. It's important to understand the speed and extent to which the deception progressed. Daniel Douglas Home parasitically attached himself to the titled and wealthy. As high society's psychic darling, he traded charm and deception for anything of value he could appropriate, seize, or steal. He alone witnessed his most renowned feats. It's important to understand that there is almost invariably an immense difference between what a psychic has done and what he or his supporters allege he has done. Eusapia Palladino wormed her way from the obscurity of a poor, illiterate household servant to a woman of great celebrity and wealth. She fooled more esteemed professors, doctors, and other metaphysical investigators of the 20th century than any other psychic. It's important to understand that education in psychology, physics, and all other fields that may have minor relationships to psychic phenomena is of no appreciable value in identifying psychic fraudulence and, therefore, in truly understanding the subject. Along with countless other psychics who have followed, each of the ones I've mentioned became motivated by money, mired in the trap of his or her own dark deception, and relegated to a pitiful existence of lost truth. none had the intelligence to understand the irony, and this is a megatruth. Anyone who seeks to injure another through deceit becomes both his own captive and captor. Houdini was unquestionably the most highly trained and astute psychic investigator of his era, with the help of such friends as newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst and journalist Joseph Pulitzer. His escapades throughout the psychic's realm seized the attention of millions as he expanded his attention, examined thoroughly, excluded assumptions, and revealed truth as no one had before. For example, it was only his exposure of the celebrated psychic known as Marjorie that caused Scientific American magazine to withhold its intended endorsement of one of the most deceptive psychics of all time. It's important to understand that he discovered the subject of psychic phenomena to be almost entirely obfuscated due to a far greater degree of fraudulence than other psychic investigators, much less the public, would have suspected. Now, to individually review other psychics of our time would be a waste of my time and yours. I've known many of the world's most famous psychics personally, and many more I've subjected to analysis with the genius formula. A minimal number are well-intentioned, and far fewer still have any notable psychic talent. I am totally unimpressed by the abilities and ethics of any of the psychics who are the most famous today. The area is so wrought with fraudulence that analyzing psychics to identify any who are both honest and authentic without the benefit of and careful application of the genius formula is an entirely unfruitful avenue of research and discovery. A century and a half ago, spirits knocked, apparitions appeared, bells inexplicably rang, and trumpets floated in the darkness of seances. Today, spoons bend, secret messages are divined, futures are portended, the departed are contacted. Mysterious images appear on negatives in the photographic darkrooms of multi-million-dollar research facilities, and television abounds with a multitude of psychics and their spirit guides attempting to induce you to give them your funds. One would hardly know that any time has passed. The public is not sure what to believe. Neither are most experts. Although most psychic investigators are well-intentioned, frankly they are blind babes in a tar pit without the genius formula. Yet if man could magically strip away the near infinite deception extant within the psychic realm, he would find himself confronting the field of his greatest ignorance, begin his discovery of the most exciting frontier he has ever known, and advance as a species faster and further than he has ever dreamed. Mark my words, it will happen. You may become an explorer, scout, wagon master, pioneer, or a descendant of earlier settlers in the movement of valid and rational psychic discovery, but it will happen, and it will happen to you. The days of the great unknown false trails and false prophets and psychics are ending at this time. For them the sun is setting, but it is your sky too, through which the dawn is breaking. The facets of psychic phenomena are many, including fortune-telling, psychic advice, psychic surgery, spiritualism, numerology, and the use of crystals, pyramids, tarot cards, magic spells, and lucky charms, and the reading of sand, palms, tea leaves, and somewhere probably Venusian excrement. That some of these techniques may occasionally appear to produce beneficial results is insignificant. Placebos result in apparent beneficial results some 20% of the time. Things are seldom as they appear. When subjected to analysis using the genius formula, it becomes obvious that none of the facets I just mentioned are of any appreciable value to the progress of mankind. As we now enter the third millennium, astrology is still one of the most popular psychic activities. Newspapers and magazines abound with astrological advice and inducements to pursue the alleged truth for a price. Occasionally it appears to work, but this is only because the astrologer's interpretations of these supposed astronomical influences are so subject to conjecture that one essentially finds what he seeks. The idea that other stars and planets, by their mere existence, locations, and movements, radiate mysterious influences toward determining the courses of human lives is invalid. It only allows its followers to deny some responsibility for their own lives and self-determinism. Again, things are seldom as they appear, and the genius formula discloses that astrology is a deceptive form of entertainment and baby pablum for the mind. As the Roman general Cassius said, quote, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Unquote. On the other hand, such subjects as clairvoyance, which is the ability to perceive beyond the range of ordinary perception, psychokinesis, which is the ability to move objects without the use of physical means, out-of-body experiences, which is the ability to be outside one's body, as opposed to mere astral projection, which is quite different, and past life recall, which is the ability to recall having existed before one's current life, are quite valid avenues of psychic research. Unfortunately, they are also subject to deception. Therefore, the problem is how to know the difference. Fortunately, it is easy with the aid of the genius formula. To be worthy of a Nobel or Pulitzer Prize, psychic investigators should follow these guidelines. Effective psychic research depends upon the development and application of 5 collective abilities, which are as follows. 1. The ability to detect and recognize the presence of deception. 2. The ability to devise and maintain controls to eliminate deception. 3. The ability to develop and maintain objectivity. 4. The ability to understand the content and mechanics of the human mind. 5. The ability to understand the basic properties of a life entity. Deception should be addressed by including highly qualified magicians in all investigations of reported psychic phenomena. The ability to be objective varies significantly among researchers. Understanding the human mind depends upon the ability to understand the basic properties of a life entity, despite science's attempt to comprehend them in reverse order. Consequently, the human mind will remain a complex and often discouraging mystery to all who fail to understand the basic properties of a life entity, which is fundamentally dependent upon the ability to differentiate between an individual and his or her body. Therefore, there are 3 critical inabilities that constitute the stumbling blocks to meaningful progress in the field of psychic research at this time. The first is the inability to detect and prevent deception. You cannot understand the truth about any matter until you have recognized and understood the lies. Furthermore, once you have understood all the lies about any matter, you will know the truth. Modern psychic investigators are woefully ignorant of the truth about psychic phenomena. The second is the ability to be objective. Most people are biased in their approach to psychic phenomena. Usually they fall into one of 2 groups. What I call the Twinkle Toes faction seems to automatically assume that any alleged psychic occurrence is authentic. Their motto is, "He or she could not possibly have known that about me." At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Ironworkers faction, who reactively assume that any manifestation that cannot be seized with stainless steel tongs hammered into a solid, heavy ball and measured 18 ways simultaneously cannot exist. Their motto is, "It's all delusion resulting from chemical imbalances in the brain." Too many New Age adherents and poorly trained psychic investigators fall into the former category. Too many students of the physical sciences and narrow-minded magicians fall into the latter. The third is the inability to identify the life entity and its basic properties. All psychic phenomena originate with the psyche, meaning the life entity, the self. It has no more to do with the brain than you have to do with your automobile's electrical system, even less. You may feel that you cannot exist without your car, but you can certainly exist without your brain. Only those who think with their brains instead of their minds would tell you otherwise. The life entity has specific properties. The identification of them is an essential key to understanding psychic phenomena. Each of those three inabilities is capable of stopping psychic research dead in its tracks, and each has. All those who ignore these revelations of the genius formula will, like the fraudulent psychics, pay dearly for their travels along the road of ignorance. But if we use these revelations wisely, we will live to see the dawn of an era of enlightenment, the likes of which this planet has never even dreamed.